he is in charge on global relations at the OECD Investment Divisions, previously as director at UNESCAP. Already published a lot of widely public publication on emerging economies, and one of them is the report that we will discuss today. The second one, we have Mr. Charles Denery. He's a U.S. economist, French Treasury at Ministry of Finance, and then also working at the OECD, graduating from London School of Economics in 2018. On the far right, on my perspective, we have Ibu Sekar. She is our Kaprodi, our undergrad head. She is working as a Director Kepatuan BPDDIE. So without further ado, I think to save time, we will give every every presenter a time to present their cases, and also the discussion. We'll having 20 minutes. Your presentations, please take your time.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for welcoming us. And it's okay, and it's a great opportunity to enter around. We are doing this small tour of 3 provincial cities in Indonesia. So this is our first of 3 events, and we very much look forward to exchanging with you and giving you an appreciation of what the OECD is, not only of what the OECD has to say about the Indonesian economy, on which I mean our distinguished discussants will certainly challenge us, and we welcome this because we are very interested in knowing what is the reaction in Indonesia to what we say. But as I say, that what we also want to do is to give you an appreciation of what the OECD is and what the OECD can do in a way for Indonesia, and why the decision taken by the government almost 2 years ago now to start the membership, the accession process at the OECD is an important element in the future economic policy making landscape of Indonesia. Let me also thank the Dutch government that has generously contributed to this disseminations events, and also to the government of Australia and the United Kingdom that have contributed towards the financing of this survey. And I understand that many of the faculties, and I'm assuming also many of the students, spend some time their studies in Australia, so it's very important this link. And last but not least, let me thank FKP for engaging with us and making this possible. So let me start from the OECD, and how do I move where do I change the slides? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah. Okay. So let me start from what the OECD and Indonesia are doing. This is a picture taken recently in late November when this survey was launched in Jakarta. And it's, as you see, it shows the president of the Indonesia, the Secretary General of the OECD. And this is something that doesn't always happen, that the Secretary General is received by head of state. It shows the level of commitment on the part of Indonesia towards the process of membership and towards the process of strengthening the links with the OECD. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with the OECD. It's an international organization, so an intergovernmental organization like the United Nations, like the World Bank, like the IMF, like the WTO, which put together governments around the world to find solutions to global challenges, such as developed global standards, such as fighting climate change and upholding international norms in different areas of governance, corruption, and the like. Also, it's very important that the OECD, unlike other institutions, is not a financial institution. We do not lend the money. So in a way, we don't have any conflict of interest in terms of the advice we give. And it's based on the peer review process, whereby the countries that are under review, like Indonesia in the case of the economic survey, are peer reviewed by the other countries. So the document that we're going to present is the result of an iteration process engaging the OECD Secretariat, the government of Indonesia, and the 37 governments of the countries that are members of the OECD. These slides will be available, so I don't go through each and every line, but let me just underscore that the OECD was created back in 1962, so it has already a longer history, a longer track record. The members, so there are 38 member countries, and we work with more than 100 economies, so mostly of them. The OECD countries account for 80% of world trade and 80% of investment. We also, or at least we used to be before the pandemic, gathering space in terms of cities around the world. And this is very important because it was part of the people-to-people exchanges, expert-to-expert exchanges that make the richness of the OECD. And I don't see what this is. Okay. We also publish a lot, and even if books are considered to be something that belongs to the past, we do still produce more than 500 books a year, which are all available through the internet for free. Our global reach is extensive, and the OECD over the past few years has extended its membership towards Latin America, Central and Eastern Europe, and also eventually to Asia, with the first country to join after many years was South Korea in '96, and hopefully one of the next ones will be Indonesia in a few years' time. We also work extensively with the G20, so a lot of the work that we do with emerging economies is done with a few years ago. Well, I mean, this is very detailed. Let me show you something about the level of engagement and increasing engagement of the OECD. And I mean, again, you have to think in terms of the formalities of international relations. So a statement, an initiative, a policy, important elements when you talk about international relations and government-to-government exchanges and relations. So all this, which may appear to be just a formal decisions, are in fact political decisions of much greater importance than it appears. So just let me mention a few of the important milestones. The opening of the OECD Jakarta office in 2016, so almost 10 years ago. The organization of the first ministerial conference in which the OECD ministers and the ministers from Southeast Asia took part in 2018. The first handover of the chairmanship of this from Korea and Thailand, which held it for the first 5 years, to Australia and Vietnam. And finally, the commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the Southeast Asia Regional Program in Hanoi, if I'm not mistaken, under the chair of Japan. Each of the OECD countries, each OECD country, or at least the most important OECD countries, have their own strategy towards the Indo-Pacific region. But what makes the OECD initiative important is that it's a space chairmanship, And again, this is something which is of obvious relevance for Indonesia as an APEC country, as a G20 country, as an as powerful for the region as a whole. Okay. I don't want to take too much time on this, especially. Okay. Now this is. I want to show you something. Now it's going backward. It's always okay. So Indonesia is the first country from Southeast Asia to start the accession process. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Indonesia was the first OECD key Jakarta in 2015. 4 joint work programs have been implemented since 2012, and have allowed the cooperation to deepen and evolve a more broader range of ministries and government bodies. By now, Indonesia is an associate member and a participant in 11 OECD bodies, meaning committees and working parties, and adheres to 15 OECD legal instruments. The OECD is a standard-setting institution, so one of the functions of the OECD is to discuss and approve and implement and follow, monitor the implementation of legal instruments. Legal instruments at the international level can be conventions, treaties, recommendations, guidelines, and some of them have to be incorporated into the national legislation of member countries or adherents. And as I said, a key moment in the relationship was in 2022, the Indonesia's G20 presidency, and the summit in Bali, which Indonesia chaired, produced a declaration with many many deliverables expected from the OECD in different areas. In 2023, on the 14th of July, the Minister Erlangga wrote to the OECD Secretary General on behalf of the government of Indonesia, expressing its interest and its commitment in joining the OECD, and that led to the 20th of February 2024, so 1 year ago, decision by the OECD Council, which is the kind of board of the OECD, which launched the accession discussions with Indonesia. Accession because for a country to join the OECD, it has to show that it's capable of implementing, adopting and implementing the OECD instruments, and the OECD view of what it constitutes good economic policies. And as part of this, the economic survey is one of the key elements of this roadmap. And in the latest Secretary General visit to Jakarta, and I show you a picture. There are many pictures from that visit, one with the President and one with Sri Mulyani, the Minister of Finance, which assisted and participated in the launch of this report, which we are going to present in a short while, going into the details of So let me turn it to Charles for the presentation of the first part of the survey.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. So yes, I'm going to talk first about the macroeconomic part of the survey. So we first started with kind of a wrap-up of what had happened in recent years. So the growth in Indonesia remains very steady. Of course, it fell during COVID, but it rebounded. It didn't fall a lot compared to other countries, as you can see for other OECD economies, and growth quickly recovered to around 5%. Next slide. Over the longer term, since the beginning of the century, the growth has been steady in Indonesia and in ASEAN countries, and so that incomes have been multiplied by nearly 3 over these 2 decades. and so the people have become richer, and the living standards have markedly improved. At the same time, the monetary policy has been prudent and effective, and so the inflation has been contained. It increased during the after COVID, during the inflationary crisis, but strong and tight monetary policy managed to tame down inflation rapidly. And if we in Indonesia is relatively similar to advanced economies, and the inflation is very moderate, so that's a strong success for the Bank Indonesia. And so now turning to our, so in back when we published the survey, we did some projections for 2024, as the year was not finished, and for 2025. So we put a slight acceleration of growth. It's possible now that with the geopolitical that inflation would keep moderating, and that deficit, the fiscal deficit, would remain within the 3% limit set by law. And so that was our outlook for the our macroeconomic outlook. So let us turn now to some slightly more structural policies. First, on the fiscal side. So yeah, we can. So as always, we always insist on the necessity to have strong public finances. And so Indonesia is doing relatively well in that regard. So when you compare to other countries in the region, the debt to GDP ratio is relatively low. Of course, it increased during COVID, but it's in 2022 it was about 40%, which is low in the region, and of course low compared to richer economies. At the same time, we advise caution, because even though debt remains low, it has increased, and up to now, GDP growth was strong, so that debt was kind of naturally falling and naturally staying stable. But we did envisage a scenario where fiscal spending needs increase faster than income, and growth slowly decelerates to below 5%. In that case, if the deficit were to be above 3% and growth would fall, then there would be a risk of debt that would keep increasing, and that's why we envisage alternative scenarios where the government manages to increase fiscal revenues at the same time as the new spending needs. So that's the dashed light blue curve. And if at the same time they manage to increase, have strong revenues and increase growth, then debt would fall even more. So that's we always insist that the countries need to have strong finances. And so for Indonesia, that means raising revenues at the pace of the spending needs of the country, and also, if possible, trying to accelerate growth to have even healthier public finances. And so, as part of this report, we emphasize that there is a need to increase fiscal revenues that are still relatively low compared to richer economies, but also in a regional comparison with Asian countries. but there's also some scope to improve spending efficiency. So here there is the case of fuel subsidies that had increased a lot after COVID during the inflationary crisis. And so for us it did exemplify the scope for improving spending efficiency. But in the report we also cover avenues for increasing revenues, because as Indonesia the population gets more affluent, there will be more needs for social spending, for infrastructure, for education, and so there is scope to improve spending efficiency, but there also needs to be an increase in revenues. And yeah, so when we compare to other countries in the region, so here we have Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, the government revenues are quite low in Indonesia, and so there is scope to try to increase this ratio and have more ways to finance public needs. And so this was the macro chapter, but we also had a chapter on socio-economic convergence. And so for Indonesia to reach its golden vision of being a rich advanced economy in 20 years, growth covered in this chapter. Yeah. So yes, the growth has been strong in Indonesia over the past 20 years, but productivity per worker remains relatively low. Of course, it's comparable to other countries in the region, but it's lower than China, lower than Malaysia, and of course, if the aim is to be closer to OECD economies, there is a long road ahead, and so productivity must accelerate. And of course, one of the determinants of productivity is education. A skilled population is more productive, is better able to adapt to the digital transition, is education is very important for productivity. And so in this report we highlighted that education can be improved further, because Indonesia has been participating for a while in the OECD PISA evaluations, and so of course, as an emerging market economy, the performance has always been below the OECD average, but as in other OECD economies, the performance has declined. That's partly due to COVID, when schools were closed, with a strong effect in Indonesia. But it's also a downward trend in Indonesia and in other OECD economies, that education has declined, and that further efforts are needed to turn back and improve education. Yeah. We also highlighted the need to shrink labor force participation gaps. So the female labor force participation rate is lower than for men. So of course, Indonesia is doing better than even some OECD economies like Turkey or Mexico, but having more labor force participation would increase economic activity. And so one of the ways to improve the maternity leave mechanism to ensure that women are not discriminated when they have kids, and that they can more easily return to the labor market after having had kids. So that's what we suggested here. Also, what is important for productivity is to having more competitive markets brings more productivity. And so one of the flagship products of the OECD in the economics department is the product market regulation indicators, where we basically have a questionnaire of all laws and regulations are done in a number of topics. And so yeah, for example, we would ask in each country, is this sector organized with a nationalized company? What is the share of the economy that is organized by nationalized economy? Because overall, when there's a state monopoly, there is less competition in the market. Or we would look at in this sector, what are the regulations on prices, on entry of new competitors. We do that also with foreign direct investments. So you have kind of the scope of this, all this, and then we put a score with each answer, and overall, when a country has a high score, it means that they are relatively restrictive, and when they have a low score, they are more open to competition. And so, as you can see, in the case of Indonesia, there are some areas where Indonesia has relatively competitive markets, more than the OECD average. So it's the licensing system is relatively open. The burden on new firms is relatively low. On the other side of the spectrum, the scope of public ownership is high, so that's something that typically the OECD doesn't advise. Of course, in the case of Indonesia, as an emerging economy, it's partly an heritage of the past, and there were some good reasons to do that, but maybe now there is opportunities to shrink the public sector a little. On trade barriers, the tariffs are relatively low, but other non-tariff barriers, import and export quotas, are burden on foreign trade, etc. And so we highlighted some areas where we think that Indonesia could become more competitive, attract new players, and overall make the economy more productive. Also, one thing that we always cover with every country is corruption and public integrity. We have different indicators of how people perceive corruption and public integrity. So there is some perception in Indonesia that corruption is still an ongoing issue, that public integrity could be increased. And so for us, it is important to safeguard the independence of the anti-corruption body, so that the people still believe that the rules are fair, that there's a level playing field between the different players. And so you want to cover it, or should I continue? So now we had a third chapter on digitalization. So the kind of reaping there is a digital revolution, and so what Indonesia needs to do to benefit from this revolution. So we start from a finding that there is scope for improving the digitalization in Indonesia. That, for example, when it comes to firms using digital technologies, Indonesia could, well, other emerging economies are doing better than Indonesia. And so that is some motivation for improving digitization in the country. One impediment in Indonesia that we find is that the penetration of fiber internet remains relatively low. So of course, part of it is due to Indonesia's unique geography. Of course, with 17,000 islands, it's harder to install high-speed internet everywhere. But still, we highlight that in other countries, improving competition in telecommunication markets, and so in that case, reducing barriers to in Indonesia. And so we also found that internet prices are relatively high in Indonesia as a percentage of income. So for households, the share of their spending on internet is relatively high. So again, part of it is due to geography and that it's more costly to have a functioning internet in a country like Indonesia. But still, we see room for making telecom markets more competitive, and which would reduce the cost of high-speed internet and help promote more digital economy. Yeah. We also see scope for improving e-government, so the kind of digital government, the scope of of all the administrative processes you can do on the internet, possibly without having to go to an agency and fill some paperwork. So some countries, some OECD countries are very advanced in e-government. So Estonia or New Zealand, for example, are very advanced, and you can have digital IDs. A lot of services can be done fully online, and there's a lot of some of them have a kind of single point of entry where one website, one government website allows you to do dozens of different online services. And so there is scope to go in that way for Indonesia by improving the coordination of the different administration and how they interact with the public, so that eventually you could have one digital ID that helps you do all the paperwork and in a more streamlined way and with less paperwork. And so the final chapter of our report dealt with the climate transition. So so of course, every country is exposed to the effects of climate change, but Indonesia, with so many islands, it's probably is more exposed than other countries to the risk of floods, and so the climate disasters have become more common in the past and are likely to become even more common in coming years. At the same time, Indonesia has pledged objectives of carbon neutrality and net zero emissions over the next decades, which are ambitious and which will require significant efforts. So there is a minus 43% target compared to the baseline scenario, and the net zero is for 2060, and that will be ambitious because emissions per capita in Indonesia remain lower than in other countries, partly because Indonesia is still emerging, but the challenge of growing the economy while reducing emissions will be difficult and ambitious for Indonesia over the coming decades. So one of the elements that we suggest to accelerate the greening of the electricity sector is to improve and expand carbon taxation across the world in OECD countries and other countries. We have seen that when you impose a price on carbon, especially on coal-fired plants, you incentivize electricity producers to shift towards cleaner forms of energy. And so Indonesia still relies a lot on coal for its energy supply, and improving and increasing carbon pricing would accelerate the transition to cleaner energy sources. We also highlight the role that road pricing and congestion charges can have in reducing road transport emissions. So transport CO2 emissions are relatively high in Indonesia compared to other countries. So there is a scope to or shift to biofuels, etc. But there is also scope to increase rail transport, increase public transportation to reduce the overall transport emissions. And
thank you. Just to sum up what we have here, it's the reform priorities of the new government, composed of some win-win programs, and in particular, as you know much better than us. And on that, of course, the jury is very much still out on what is going to be the result of the flagship program. We see it as a positive commitment on the part of the administration. We just draw the attention to the fact that if you have one instrument, you have to be, you need to have one goal, and it's not completely clear whether this nutritious meal program has the goal of improving education attainment or reducing poverty, and I think it's very important to have a clarity on this. And just 2 minutes to sum up what we have in this report. Basically, the challenges are enormous for Indonesia, which can build upon the results of the past 20 years of fast economic growth, but at the same time, it's an economic growth that remains shaky, as we saw in the post-pandemic period. The middle class is suffering. Inflation is always around the corner. It's a big risk. I'm sure the discussants will come back to this. Financial markets have been supportive of the performance of Indonesia, but obviously if there is a reversal of fortunes and increasing volatility on international financial markets, Indonesia is vulnerable. An important point which we make throughout independence of the KPK are important elements. Another point we make is that looking at other countries, what is important is the commitment over the medium run. There is no silver bullet. What is important is the commitment kept over time. And again, that's important to make sure that different administrations follow more or less the same, apply more or less the same policies and promote the same policies. It's particularly important these days when you have increasing protectionism in OECD countries, so which affect obviously countries like Indonesia and other emerging economies. And what is also important is to look at fiscal consolidation from the right perspective. Indonesia, in fact, as you saw, is not a big spender compared to other governments, and countries where fiscal policies are much more proactive. So what is important is to make sure that the adjustments made, not only at the level, but the composition of fiscal spending are conducive to growth, so that the fiscal multiplier remains important and sustainable over the medium run. And finally, of course, what is the OECD role in this? It's a journey that of accession to the OECD, and it opens the door to make the reforms which are needed, which in many cases are linked to the OECD recommendations. So in order for Indonesia to be ready for the OECD membership, the reforms which are needed are the same reforms which are needed to increase economic growth opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Andrea and Mr. Charles, for the presentations. Big applause for them. For the second section or the next sessions, I would like to invite Ibu Dian for the commentary regarding the OECD report based on the perspective on BPDDIY. Please, Ibu.
Baik, terima kasih. I'm sorry, I apologize. I will be presenting in bahasa Indonesia. Baik, teman-teman dari FEB sekalian, saya akan menyampaikan bagaimana implementasi. Jadi seperti yang tadi sudah disampaikan bahwa kita kenapa harus mengimplementasikan ekonomi hijau, berawal karena kita itu menjadi salah satu anggota di Paris Agreement. Ya, jadi menjadi salah satu kewajiban kita sebagai salah satu anggota di situ untuk mengimplementasikan ekonomi hijau. Demikian juga di perbankan dan di Bank BPDDIY sama juga kami juga melakukan mengimplementasikan ekonomi hijau karena regulator juga mengatur bagaimana perbankan itu harus melakukan atau mengimplementasikan apa yang harus menjadi kewajiban perbankan. Oke. Jadi regulator mengatur kalau di perbankan itu diatur menggunakan POJK 51 tahun 2017 yang salah satu tujuannya adalah memastikan bahwa lembaga jasa keuangan atau perusahaan yang terdaftar di Bursa Efek Indonesia mempertimbangkan faktor keberlanjutan dalam pengambilan keputusan baik itu investasi maupun operasional yang mencakup lingkungan sosial tata kelola perusahaan. Jadi perbankan di Indonesia ini diminta oleh regulator untuk memastikan bahwa kami itu melakukan usaha atau operasionalnya itu harus berbasis pada ekonomi hijau. Salah satu yang perlu dilakukan adalah bagaimana kita memastikan bahwa usaha yang kita lakukan itu untuk menunjang keberlanjutan ekonomi di Indonesia. Oke, next. Nah, kemudian OJK mengeluarkan ada 6 buku yang harus dilakukan oleh perbankan. Yang pertama adalah mengenai bagaimana menjelaskan helikopter view-nya bagaimana mengenai climate risk management. Jadi harus ada skenario terkait dengan climate risk management. Dan ini harus kita laporkan setiap tahun, dan untuk pertama kali nanti akan dilaporkan pada tahun ini. Di pertengahan tahun kami sudah harus menyusun roadmap-nya, menyusun skenario apa yang harus kita lakukan dalam menjalankan climate risk management ini. Kemudian di buku 2 itu ada panduan teknis mengenai bagaimana melakukan atau mengintegrasikan CRM ini di dalam manajemen risiko. Ada 4 manajemen risiko yang harus kita perhitungkan. Ada risiko kredit atau risiko pembiayaan, kemudian ada risiko pasar, risiko likuiditas, dan risiko operasional. Kemudian di buku ketiga ini kita harus melakukan perhitungan metode emisi. Jadi tadi mungkin sudah juga mendengarkan bahwa Indonesia mempunyai target untuk menurunkan emisi karbon. Termasuk pemerintah sudah mengeluarkan tax ya, pajak karbon untuk industri. Nah, perbankan pun juga diminta untuk melakukan perhitungan terhadap emisi karbon. Emisi karbon ini tidak hanya menghitung operasional di kantor saja, tapi juga kita harus menghitung debitur kita. Jadi debitur itu harus dihitung emisi karbonnya, terutama yang khususnya untuk industri. Kemudian yang buku 4 adalah data makroekonomi. Nah ini nanti karena ini kita gunakan untuk melakukan skenario stress test. Jadi di skenario stress test itu dengan mengacu data makroekonomi yang tadi mungkin juga sudah disampaikan mengenai GDP, nah itu diperhitungkan juga di dalam stress test yang kita lakukan. Jadi ada analisa-analisa risiko, kemudian juga termasuk di dalamnya ada skenario apa saja yang kita buat. Jadi biasanya ada 3 skenario, ada low, moderate, kemudian high. Dampaknya terhadap perbankan itu seperti apa? Nah yang di buku kelima adalah data bencana. Data bencana ini berupa skenario stress test CRM dan itu mengacu pada BNPB. Jadi di seluruh Indonesia ini kan termasuk risikonya tidak semua daerah itu risikonya cukup besar. Jadi ada yang risikonya tinggi, ada yang risikonya rendah. Ini pengaruhnya apa di perbankan? Karena ketika kita memberikan pembiayaan atau kredit, kita perlu menghitung risiko wilayahnya. Jadi misalnya di wilayah-wilayah yang mungkin risikonya tinggi terdampak climate risk, kita harus menghitung juga. Misalnya agunannya kita hitung nilainya mungkin kita turunkan, tidak seperti normal gitu. Karena apa? Karena dampak dari climate risk itu nanti kemungkinan bahwa agunan ini nilainya akan lebih rendah dibanding kalau tidak wilayah-wilayah yang tidak terdampak climate risk. Kemudian yang buku ke-6 ini kertas kerjanya. Oke, next. Nah, gambaran umumnya seperti ini. Jadi OJK itu mengatur untuk gambaran umum protokol atau cakupan emisi yang harus perbankan hitung, itu ada 3 scoop. Yang scoop pertama ini jadi kita diminta untuk menghitung secara internal. Jadi misalnya kendaraan itu kita hitung berapa emisi karbon yang dihasilkan. Jadi mau nggak mau kita hitung semua, termasuk bahwa gedung, misalnya gedung kantor, apakah sudah menggunakan energi terbarukan, misalnya gitu. Kemudian termasuk penggunaan untuk kendaraan tentu menggunakan bahan bakarnya apa gitu, apakah sudah menggunakan listrik atau masih menggunakan bahan bakar minyak. Kemudian yang kedua mengenai electricity, ini yang listrik tadi, ini masuk di dalam scope 2. Kemudian yang ketiga, scope 3, ini yang di nasabah, termasuk pengolahan limbahnya seperti apa, ini tiga scope ini perlu kita perhitungkan semuanya. Jadi kita di perbankan tidak hanya diwajibkan untuk menghitung perusahaan kita sendiri, tapi kita juga harus menghitung emisi karbon yang dihasilkan oleh industri, termasuk nasabah yang ada di tempat kita. Oke, next. Nah, tadi mungkin juga sudah disampaikan mengenai yang pertama adalah bagaimana kita sumber daya manusia untuk mengatasi kelemahan sumber daya manusia baik yang di internal maupun nasabah. Nah, yang kalau di internal ini terus terang tidak semua mungkin sudah memahami mengenai risiko iklim. Karena ini mungkin bagi kita, ya meskipun OJK sudah mengeluarkan 2017, tapi sekarang pun juga mungkin awareness kita terhadap risiko iklim ini mungkin tidak semendalam yang diinginkan gitu ya. Jadi ini menjadi sebuah langkah penting untuk kita internalisasi dulu ke dalam, ke SDM, bahwa risiko iklim ini menjadi salah satu hal yang mesti harus menjadi hal operasional yang mesti harus kita lakukan setiap hari adalah melakukan pendidikan dan pelatihan. Jadi kita mengirim account officer atau yang biasanya membahas kredit di tempat kita salah satunya untuk mengikuti pelatihan-pelatihan terkait dengan risiko iklim. Bagaimana cara menghitung, kemudian dampak terhadap lingkungan itu apa saja. Karena mereka nanti juga perlu memperhitungkan, jadi di bank itu juga kita mendapatkan insentif atau RPIM kalau kita memberikan kredit yang dampak lingkungannya sudah dikelola oleh nasabahnya. Jadi ada insentifnya di situ. Insentifnya insentif terhadap GWM. Giro wajib minimalnya kita mendapatkan insentif. Nah, ini kan menjadi sesuatu yang setiap account officer itu harus memahami bagaimana membahas kredit. Jadi ada beberapa kredit yang mungkin kalau misalnya UMKM itu juga ada juga yang mereka sudah memahami terhadap sustainable ya. Jadi menggunakan bahan-bahan yang mungkin bisa diolah kembali dan sebagainya. Nah, kemudian yang kedua kita membuat semacam kebijakan internal. Kebijakan internal ini mencakup tugas dan tanggung jawab seluruh pegawai, kemudian membentuk sebuah tim yang di dalamnya juga ini terintegrasi di dalam organisasi. Jadi ada satu tim yang bertanggung jawab penuh terhadap pengembangan mengenai climate risk itu, pengimplementasi mengenai climate risk. Kemudian selain itu tentu saja sebagai tanggung jawab perusahaan kita melakukan implementasi di dalam CSR. Jadi CSR yang kita berikan pun juga berfokus pada pendidikan lingkungan, kemudian juga mitigasi terhadap perubahan iklim di dalam masyarakat. Nah, ini juga yang kita harapkan mendorong partisipasi masyarakat untuk peduli terhadap terhadap sustainable, termasuk juga terhadap ekonomi ya, green economy, supaya ini tentu saja dengan mengurangi memberikan kampanye-kampanye, kemudian juga mengurangi dampak limbah dan sebagainya, karena ini menjadi salah satu isu yang sekarang ini mungkin teman-teman mahasiswa banyak membaca dan mendengar isu mengenai sampah ini di Jogja menjadi salah satu yang sekarang banyak dibicarakan. Oke, next. Nah, bagaimana penerapannya itu di perbankan? Tadi sudah saya sampaikan ada 4 risiko, ada risiko kredit, ada risiko pasar, kemudian risiko operasional dan risiko likuiditas. Di risiko kredit, penerapan risikonya adalah kita harus melakukan perhitungan stress test pada ada 7 sektor ekonomi yang rentan terdampak iklim. Salah satunya mungkin ada pertanian, peternakan, kemudian juga termasuk infrastruktur, itu masuk dalam 7 sektor yang harus diperhitungkan karena ini rentan terhadap iklim. Jadi misalnya kayak pertanian ini kan sangat rentan. Itu terjadi perubahan iklim, bisa jadi petani dan gagal panen sehingga tidak bisa membalikan kreditnya. Nah, ini perlu kita perhitungkan. Kenapa? Karena di situ kita harus menghitung risikonya. Berapa cadangan yang harus kita bentuk. Kemudian kebijakan kredit ini yang sudah kita lakukan, kita memberikan kebijakan kredit untuk pembelian kendaraan listrik. Selain subsidi dari pemerintah, kita memberikannya dengan suku bunga yang rendah. Ini menjadi salah satu bentuk komitmen kita. Kemudian ada program kredit KPR satu rumah satu pohon. Jadi kita memberikan kredit untuk KPR, tapi kita berikan bibit pohon untuk ditanam. Selain itu, yang tadi juga mungkin sudah saya jelaskan bahwa ada wilayah-wilayah tertentu yang mungkin harus kita pertimbangkan penurunan nilai agunanya. Di beberapa wilayah kan ada 2 yang sudah menjadi concernnya OJK itu baru 2. Yang pertama adalah banjir, yang kedua kebakaran. Nah, di wilayah-wilayah kita turunkan, tidak sama seperti normal, karena di situ ada rawan bencana. Kemudian risiko operasional, yaitu dengan melakukan program penurunan emisi. Yang pertama kita mobil dinas sekarang hampir semua kita gunakan yang hybrid. Kemudian surat menyurat, tentu saya yakin teman-teman sekalian di sini juga sudah semuanya serba digital, jadi kita sudah paperless. Kemudian termasuk pengajuan pinjaman atau kredit itu sudah pengajuannya menggunakan digital. Jadi kita kurangi pengajuan itu harus datang ke kantor, kemudian mengisi form dan sebagainya, tapi bisa dilakukan menggunakan digital. Yang keempat, pengurangan limbah plastik di kantor, kita berusaha untuk tidak menggunakan minuman kemasan. Kemudian sumber listrik, jadi ada salah satu kantor kita yang sumber listriknya sekarang sudah menggunakan solar cell. Ya, ini menjadi salah satu bentuk kepedulian kita terhadap lingkungan. Nah, untuk risiko pasar, karena Bank Indonesia juga memberikan insentif untuk perbankan yang memberikan baik itu kredit maupun juga kita membeli portofolio yang green. Jadi kita juga membeli green bond, nilainya 136 miliar dan ini setiap tahun kita juga meningkat untuk pembelian green bond ini karena ini juga menguntungkan bagi kita karena pemerintah ataupun Bank Indonesia memberikan insentif untuk giro wajib minimalnya akan diberikan insentif. Jadi ini kan melonggarkan bank untuk memberikan pinjaman. Kemudian yang terakhir risiko likuiditas. Nah, kalau untuk risiko likuiditas ini kita kecukupan penyangga likuiditas yang tadi yang RPIM tadi. Jadi rasio pembiayaan termasuk pada UMKM ini diberikan insentif oleh Bank Indonesia khususnya untuk penyaluran kredit UMKM. Oke, next. Nah, kerangka manajemen risikonya kalau kita bicara mengenai climate risk, 4 hal tadi, 4 risiko tadi, khususnya untuk risiko kredit dan risiko pasar, ini kita menghitungnya secara kuantitatif. Jadi menghitung secara kuantitatif tadi setelah dihitung menggunakan stress test, kemudian kita menghitung variabel makroekonominya, kemudian PD itu probability default, jadi kita menghitung probability default itu berdasarkan data historis yang kita miliki selama 10 tahun, kita lihat apakah ada risiko pada sektor tertentu yang kita miliki yang terdampak karena bencana. Tapi bukan termasuk gempa, kalau gempa kan bukan termasuk climate risk. Nah, berapa banyak kredit yang kita berikan ini yang terdampak karena bencana. Kemudian kita hitung juga loss given default-nya. Seberapa banyak kemudian itu bisa kembali. Nah, ini kemudian berdasarkan sektor ekonomi yang 7 sektor yang sudah ditentukan oleh OJK ini kita hitung secara kuantitatif. Kemudian kalau untuk risiko likuiditas dan risiko operasional kita menghitungnya secara kualitatif. Jadi deskripsi dampak terhadap bank ini terdampak enggak di LCR maupun LDR-nya. Termasuk gangguan operasional di cabang. Ada enggak cabang kita yang pernah kebanjiran misalnya? Dampaknya kerugiannya berapa? Jadi kita hitung kerugian di masing-masing kantor kita jika itu terdampak karena misalnya banjir atau kebakaran. Tapi kebakarannya karena kebakaran hutan, misalnya ada beberapa teman kita di perbankan lain yang misalnya di daerah Kalimantan yang sering ada kebakaran hutan. Pernah enggak mereka terdampak? Ini yang kita hitung secara kualitatif dampaknya terhadap kerugian bank sebesar apa. Oke, next. Nah, mitigasi terkait dengan risiko, 4 risiko tadi tentu kita harus melakukan mitigasi. Mitigasi yang kita lakukan khususnya untuk kredit kita melakukan diversifikasi terhadap portofolio kredit. karena OJK sudah membuat ada 7 sektor yang kemungkinan terdampak climate risk, maka kita melakukan diversifikasi portofolio kredit. Diversifikasi ini kita ada limitnya, kemudian juga jadi masing-masing sektor kita hitung, kemudian kita bagi sehingga risikonya itu terbagi di beberapa sektor supaya kita jika terdampak ada climate risk kita tidak kena kerugian yang besar. Kemudian yang kedua, pengembangan produk keuangan hijau. Tadi sudah sampaikan ada beberapa produk keuangan hijau yang kita luncurkan dalam rangka untuk mendukung keuangan hijau. Kemudian yang ketiga, penyusunan kebijakan internal. Jadi ada limitnya. Misalnya sektor pertanian kita kasih limit, misalnya kalau kita memang punya sektor itu dan pernah terdampak, ada limitnya supaya kita tidak kerugiannya tidak terlalu besar. Oke. Alat atau metode analisisnya tadi model ekonomi makro, kemudian ada pengujian sensitivitas, kemudian ada data historis yang kita gunakan, kemudian kita hitung menggunakan uji stress test. Next. Nah, ini adalah bentuk dari komitmen Bank BPD DIY. Setiap tahun kita harus membuat laporan ke OJK mengenai ekonomi keberlanjutan dan apa saja yang kita lakukan karena ini sesuai dengan POJK nomor 51 dan SEOJK nomor 16. Next. Ini komitmen CSR. Jadi di sektor lingkungan hidup, sosial dan ekonomi sebesar 2,9 pada tahun 2023. Untuk tahun 2024 karena kita belum selesai RUPS jadi belum bisa kita sampaikan. Next. Ini komitmen Bank BPD DIY dalam rangka ekonomi keberlanjutan. Termasuk ada program sampah. Ini pada saat kita meresmikan gedung kantor hybrid ya yang menggunakan ini produk kita KPR Gria dan kendaraan listrik dengan bunga yang murah karena ada subsidi juga murah sekali 0,4 dan 0,42. Nah kalau mahasiswa kalau yang punya usaha nah kalau siapa tahu kalau Bapak Ibu dosen ada yang berminat monggo. Kemudian, nah sebagai penutup tentu dampak perubahan iklim terhadap ekonomi dan keuangan daerah ini sangat kompleks dan luas. Dan Jogja ini termasuk karena ada pariwisata, kemudian juga infrastruktur, tentu ada dampak meskipun setelah kita hitung juga mungkin tidak terlalu besar. Tapi ini menjadi penting dan ini menjadi tanggung jawab tidak hanya mungkin pemerintah daerah tapi menjadi tanggung jawab kita bersama, baik Bank BPD, kemudian juga sekarang ini ada dari akademisi, kemudian masyarakat dan media dalam rangka untuk bagaimana mengembangkan strategi adaptasi dan mitigasi yang komprehensif. Jadi tentu teman-teman adik-adik mahasiswa juga punya tanggung jawab juga bagaimana supaya dampak terhadap ekonomi karena perubahan iklim ini bisa kita menjadi kerjasama kita bersama supaya untuk membangun ketahanan ekonomi daerah. Saya kira itu, kemudian mungkin mohon maaf tambah sedikit karena saya ada pesan sponsor selain perspektif dari sisi perbankan, saya diminta untuk sedikit menyampaikan mengenai perspektif dari sisi pengusaha, karena kebetulan saya juga sebagai pengurus di Kadin Indonesia di Yogyakarta. Di sini ada teman saya juga Pak Timotius yang mungkin bisa menambahkan nanti. Jadi kalau kami di Kadin sudah bekerja sama dengan salah satu pengusaha di Singapura itu yayasan, termasuk yayasan dari Bill Gates di sekolah, kemudian di tempat wisata, kemudian juga di kantor pemerintah daerah untuk pengolahan limbah yang kemudian pengolahan limbah cair yang ini diolah kemudian hasilnya airnya ini bisa digunakan kembali tapi tidak untuk dikonsumsi tapi untuk untuk menyiram tanaman, kemudian juga untuk hal lain. Dan ini Sudah kita lakukan ada di beberapa tempat, jadi ada di SMA 1, kemudian ada di Daerah Istimewa Yogyakarta yang akan diberikan alat untuk mengolah limbah cair. Selain itu teman-teman pengusaha tentunya juga selain melalui reuse gitu ya yang bisa diolah kembali seperti biasanya kan kalau teman-teman beli itu dari plastik, ini kita teman-teman sudah mulai berubah menggunakan bahan-bahan yang mudah diolah kembali atau mungkin bisa kalau menggunakan ini membawa alat sendiri tentu mendapatkan diskon. Salah satu yang kita lakukan meskipun itu hal yang kecil, tapi kita berusaha dari Kadin maupun dari Jo. Mungkin itu yang bisa saya sampaikan. Terima kasih.
Bu Dian atas presentasinya. Thank you for the presentations. Really interesting from the perspective of BPDDIE. Lastly but not least, I would like to invite Ibu Sekar to give like some discussions regarding the presentations.
Okay, that's loud. All right, okay, so thanks so much, Wisnu, thanks so much, Andrea, and also Charles, and thanks so much, Bu Dian. I learned a lot from your presentation. I think you should turn that on. Yes. It won't turn off? No. All right, I'm so sorry for the technical glitch. Let me thank you again, Andrea, and also Charles for the presentation. Thank you, Vidian, for the presentation. I'm gonna touch upon something that I feel like could be very interesting for OECD to talk about in the next part of the survey, which is in 2025. My name is Sakar. I'm a researcher and also a teacher at the Department of Economics. Can I have the next slide, please? All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the current economic condition, but from a different perspective, because I know that you guys use a lot of GDP data. What I want to bring up to the audience here is the other things that we can look at other than just GDP. So we can look at the consumer confidence survey. I know I should have used a bigger line width, right? But if you look at the confidence survey, this is the index from Bank Indonesia, 2023 to 2025 January. You can see that there are three different index basically. The dark orange, that's the index year-on-year change. And then you have the present situation, and you have the expectation or like the future situation. So if you look at the three index, this is on percentage year-on-year growth. You can see that there's a slight negative trend from 2023 to 2025. And if you can see, like the present situation index is actually minus 1.84 compared to January 2025. So I feel like in the present situation, consumer confidence is pretty low, but if you look at the expectation of the confidence, it's still pretty robust. Okay, so this is something that we can also look at in the next few months, because a lot of things happening with the fiscal policy, with the budget cut, with a lot of, I know that investors are starting to get nervous. We see that in the Jakarta Stock Index, we see that in the rupiah, for example. So I think this is a really good index for us to start to look at how the consumer feels about the general level condition of the economics. Not yet. Can you go back? Okay. The slide, the panel on the right-hand side, that's the month-to-month change. For the students, if you don't understand month-to-month change, that's just change between the period of months. Year-on-year is change between the previous period, previous year, but the same month, same period. If you look at the month-to-month changes, 2023 is a little bit it's less volatile than 2024 and 2025. So I know that there is slight seasonal component right there. I should have probably seasonally adjusted that first. to share the month-to-month change. But then you look at the 2023, 2024, then you can see there's a big changes or like a slight volatility happen in 2024 compared to 2023. So all in all, if you look at the trend, I think this is also something that's very interesting, because then you can also gauge like the consumer confidence in the sense that how that would affect the growth in general. Can I have the next one, please? And then we can also look at the retail sales survey. This is also a survey by Bank Indonesia. And this tells us how much the retail feels about their should we call it the sales, and also current period, future period. They do have expectation and so on and so forth. The graph on the left-hand side, you have retail sales for Indonesia. That's the dark orange. That's the year-on-year change. And then you have a retail sales for Jakarta only. That's the yellow line. That's also percentage year-on-year. So if you look at the data in January 2025, there's a really large drop in the retail sales survey in Jakarta from 11% in December to 6.47% in January. Whereas if you look at the Indonesian retail sales survey, there's a slight drop. And now on the right-hand side, you get all of the retail sales survey for each sector. You have motor vehicle, food and beverage, and so on and so forth. And most of the sectors are pretty robust, except that if you look at the household equipment, and also if you look at the information and communication equipment. Can I have the next slide, please? I know that you also use PMI. PMI is also a good indicator for us to see how the economy is doing. Sometimes we also do see, look at the CEIC leading indicator that could also gauge like where we are at now, macroeconomic wise. And I want to talk about a very important data for us to look at, which is motor vehicle sales and registration, and also cement consumption. I know that you guys incorporate economic condition with GDP. You always look at GDP, for example. But the biggest drawback of using GDP is because it's quarterly frequency. Okay, so because it's not high frequency data, then it's very hard for us to look at how the economy is doing month to month. Okay, now if you look at the motor vehicle sales and also motor vehicle registration, that's on the left-hand side, and also on the middle part of the graph, you can see that the motor vehicle registration year-on-year data, you have that's a very stark trend, and the trend is pretty much negative. Okay, so you still have an increase in motor vehicle registration from period to period, which is monthly. But if you look at the year-on-year trend, year-on-year trend is falling. If you look at the motor vehicle sales in 2024 and 2025, there's a really big volatility in the month-to-month data in the mid-2024. But if you look into the year-on-year data for motor vehicle sales, which again, it's kind of like gauge the economic activity, because if people don't buy motor vehicles, probably for their business or for their own household, then probably the economy is not as doing as well. So if you look at the year-on-year change, 2024, it's actually very low, and then it's started to go back up. But again, this is something that we cannot just, we have to take it with a lot of grain of salt, because motor vehicles is one thing, but we can also look at the cement consumption. Cement consumption is also very interesting because this gauges the economy from the construction sector. Okay, the idea is that when a lot of people consume cement for construction, not for consumption purpose, of course, especially if you look at residential investment, for example, that would also factor into the gross capital fixed formation, GFCF. And you can see that there's a big drop in the cement consumption year-on-year wise. But if you want to argue, okay, we can argue that it's dropping because in 2024 there's a large development happening in IKN, and the consumption at that period is very big. So you want to, if you compare the consumption today and consumption in January 2024, of course it's not going to be apple to apple because of IKN was being rapidly built in January 2024. Can I have the next one, please? Now, this is something that I know everyone is starting to feel nervous about, which is the exchange rate, because we have depreciation again, and that's, we have scored depreciation for some period now, for some months, and I feel like that trend will continue. People will ask me, what will be your forecast for 2025? I think it will reach something closer to 17,000. But I'm not going to publish that forecast here. I know I don't want to make people get more nervous. But if you look at how the currency, the currency rupiah compared to some other currencies in the region, you can see that some of the currency also got like a persistent depreciation over in 2024 as well. Some countries like Malaysia and Thailand, they did really well. They had a depreciation in the late 2024. But overall, if you look at other countries in the area, they roughly perform the same. If you look at the standard deviation, the volatility, Indonesia tends to be more volatile than Malaysia, for example. But yeah, that's something that's related to the country itself. But if you look at the depreciation and you feel nervous about it, I don't think you should feel nervous about it yet, because our foreign exchange reserve is still very robust. If you look at how many months that could cover import and also the payment of government debt, it exceeds the level of 3 months. Okay, so if you look at foreign exchange reserve and that could pay for 7.82 months of our imports, we're pretty safe because the international standard is 3. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, this is also something that's very important because inflation is something that's, in a lot of administration, we always talk about growth. You want to have 8% of growth, 10% of growth. But inflation is also very important because no matter how much income you put into people's pocket, if affordability is really bad, then people are not going to be happy. Welfare is still going to be low. Okay. Now, if you look at the data, this is something interesting because we saw a spike in CPI year-on-year percentage in 2022 until mid 2023. Okay. Now, if you dissect the inflation into core inflation, food, volatile energy, and administered and food inflation, you can see that there's actually 2 factors happening in 2022. So the first round of inflation was coming from food ingredients and also the volatile foods, okay? And then the later part of 2022, that's when you have the subsidy adjusted, fuel subsidy adjusted, and that creates a spike in administered prices, okay? So if you look at the data, then 2022, if you talk to Bank Indonesia, they, it's a headache for them because they didn't meet the inflation target because of the 2 shocks that's happening. I'm going to talk about the shocks later on. Next. Now, this is something interesting that I found in your survey, which is you talk about subsidy. And I feel like we need to talk about subsidy in a more precise way because I think that the cost of the subsidy is already been too big. Can we go to the next slide? So energy subsidies are not well targeted. It's very regressive. This is the finding that my colleague in Kemenko PM found, that if you look at the decile of the household, a lot of consumer, if you look at the benefit incidence of energy subsidy, for example, for electricity and for the fuel and for the solar, the diesel, then you can still see like wealthy people benefit off of the subsidy. And most of the benefits are going into the well-off household. Next one, please. Now, if you look at the proportion of electricity user and the subsidy, you can see also that the very wealthy households still kind of like enjoy a big benefit from the subsidy. So if you look at the panel on the left-hand side, you have the breakdown of each decile of household, and then you have like, okay, so if you look at the 10th decile, you have a lot households are using 1,300 VA plus, versus that if you see that in the first decile, we still have some household that uses 1,300 VA electricity. That also happened in LPG. When you look at the household, even like the most wealthy household are still using LPG 3 kilo. Yeah. Anyways, the next one, please. Now, this is also happening for fuel and also happening for diesel. Can I have the next one also? Now, this is very interesting because then if you look at the household with the 90 VA subsidy and household with the 900 VA non-subsidy, then you know the 900 VA group subsidy consume much more than the non-subsidy. Okay, so this is something that's show that the subsidy is actually regressive. So what can we do? You touch upon how can we do subsidy reform, but subsidy reform is tough, especially politically, because you know when you reform a subsidy, then inflation happens. It's something that's inevitable, right? You reduce the subsidy, you take the subsidy out of fuel, diesel, electricity, LPG, whatever it is, that would trigger inflation. So I think it will be interesting if you can give us like an idea of how would a reform, subsidy reform should be conducted. Is it, I don't know, probably like you go through the automatic pricing mechanism, means that you let the price to float according to the global price, for example. Is it also good if you kind of like fix the administration of the subsidy itself so it's well more targeted? I feel like the mix of what kind of subsidy that we have to reform first. Do we have to reform LPG first versus electricity first versus fuel first? You know, the mix of those. Do you increase the prices by 10% at a time, or you increase LPG first, and then you know once the LPG subsidy is almost phased out, you start with another electricity subsidy, for example? That will be very interesting. Okay, so I think you know the mix of subsidy phasing out, the way that we kind of like do the reform, not just for one type of energy, but the mix of energy is going to be very interesting. Next one. Last one, I want to talk about inflation and prices, because as I said before, no matter how much you put money into people's pocket, if they cannot afford things, then no welfare would for sure not going to be high. Now, one thing that's interesting is that we found, can I have the next one, please? We are so prone to external shock. So when you look at the inflation, if you go back to the inflation prices inflation in 2022, and then you saw a lot of food prices went up, that was because the input of non-subsidized fertilizer in Indonesia went up. So that jacked up the price, the cost of fertilizer, jacked up the price of domestic fertilizer, jacked up the price of cost of production, and that goes through the price of rice, and that also goes to inflation. Can I have the next one, please? And this is what we found. So the bottom panel, so the bottom panel is the retail price of medium quality of rice. Please do not cite this work because this is still in progress. So the bottom part is the retail price, the middle part is the wholesale price, and the red graph is the producer price, okay? We were kind of like gobsmacked looking at the medium quality rice, the price of medium quality rice went up so high in May 2022. if you were to buy rice, medium quality rice in May 2022, you pay 12,000. Now you pay 15,000. So that's a really big increase of price in a very short amount of time. And if you look at poor household that has to face this kind of thing, that you're kind of like, okay, what is the role of a government here? Because we cannot let this thing happen again in the future, right? So what I did, this is a very simple exercise here, guys. So I'm looking at the change, the contribution of wholesale price and the producer price to retail price. So I'm just doing a very simple regression, but I'm doing a rolling regression with 36 months of window. So the window is three years, and I do like a rolling window of the regression, and then I found that in May 2022, it was the producer price that dominate the change in retail price. So most of the retail price, the change in retail price comes from producer price, okay? And then when you look at why is that happening, like why is producer price dominating the change in retail price? Can I have the next one, please? This is getting more interesting because now you can see there's an effect of global political risk. So this is what we call impulse response function, but I make it time varying impulse response function. So the impulse response function that you normally see is U-shape or inverted U-shape. Basically creating a three-dimensional impulse response function, and then I slice it according to the horizon. So panel A is 1 horizon ahead, B is 3, C is 6 horizon ahead, D is 12 horizon ahead, okay? So when you look at the global political risk, so that's the first 4 panel on the top, you see that there's a big spike in 2020, late 2021, 2022. And then moving on to the right side of that, you can see that for a GPR shock, so if you have geopolitical risk shock, that would affect the farmer cost of production. And if you look at the effect of, so if you look at the time varying effect, the effect on 2022, around 2022, mid 2022, is larger than the other period, okay? Now, if you go to the bottom left panel of that, you can see that there is also a positive effect of producer price, of cost of production of farmer to the producer price, but in a more longer period, so around 3 months. And then the last one, you see that there is a positive effect of producer price to the retail price. And if you look at the effect from 1 month, so panel A, B, C, D, you can see that panel B is actually larger than panel A. So if you look at the effect of the producer price to retail price, it's getting bigger as you go into more further horizon, okay? So this is something that's very interesting because if you talk about inflation, most likely you're gonna talk about like how monetary policy reacts to inflation, how monetary policy stabilizes inflation, but monetary policy cannot do it all. What the central bank has been doing so far, they're not just focusing on changing the benchmark rate, but they're also coordinating with the local government and the regional inflation controlling team, or what we call TPID, okay? Because if in a lot of different cases, if you look at inflation data, those spikes that creates like a very high inflation was because of cost push shock inflation. So in a sense that if you have a cost push shock inflation and then you increase your interest rate, that's kind of like you're killing the businesses and you're killing the consumer even faster, okay? Now, if it's cost push shock, then the response of inflation should be very different as well. So this is why Bank Indonesia, if you have heard, they have a lot. They have Bank Indonesia branches in each provinces. They're actually coordinating with the local government to make sure the affordability of a lot of food ingredients. Okay, so they do like interregional cooperation, kerjasama antar daerah, They monitor the prices through BPS, for example. They monitor their prices through their own survey. If you see PHPS, so Center of Strategic Food Price Information, you have a lot of different things that Bank Indonesia is doing in terms of controlling inflation. I think this is something that's very good, and I think something, in the future, the effectiveness of TPID would also be very beneficial to controlling inflation, especially when it's a cost push shock. Yeah, and with that slide, I will end my presentation. Thank you so much.
Bu Sekar. So I would like to invite the audience to give questions. We have like several report that we can give when you ask questions. So who wants to ask questions? 1, 2, okay. Baiknya.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, and let me introduce myself. My name is Alina Bila Aksa, and at first all, I want to thank you about the one of the WIN program in Indonesia. It's called Nutritious Meal Program in School, or namely MBG. We know that, and we know that the nutritious meal program in school is a huge program that implicate in Indonesia. And so I want to ask that, does the MBG program or the nutritious meal program in school is effective to implement in Indonesia? And what is the outcome based on the country in OECD members, and that maybe have implement the program? And is there any evidence by OECD members? And because I hear by someone in board general, it's Dewan Ekonomi Nasional, and he said that the outcome of the program is not clear yet. And thank you.
Thank you for the questions. The next questions.
Thank you very much for giving me these wonderful opportunities. I'm the colleague of Ibu Dian. My name is Timothy Aprianto. I'm representing Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Special Region Yogyakarta. Thank you for giving this very wonderful evening, very wonderful afternoon to have what OECD report have already published by November 2024. In general, in overall reports, we are glad to have that report, because on that report we can know that Indonesia is one of the very optimistic country among the OECD members. Then, in particularly for Yogyakarta Special Region itself, I should report that our economic is supported by micro, small, and medium enterprises, or UMKM. In Yogyakarta, we have around 345,000 MSMEs. And we are the best MSME support by our local governments, because we have what we call as innovative platforms called Sibakul, run by local governments platform for micro, small, and medium enterprises, and also supported by licensing agreements. Why we become the best MSME support in Indonesia, because around 60% of our MSMEs already has legal status called NIP, Nomor Induk Berusaha. We have around 200,000 MSMEs has been legalized by the licensing agreements. But I should also add about Mbak Dian already explained to us that Kadin Yogyakarta, we have cooperations with Pijar Foundations and also supported by Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation and Asian Institute of Technology, AIT in Germany. We have projects called smart sanitation projects. We built around 15 smart sanitation in 15 different locations, and 5 out of 15 smart sanitation has been inaugurated by our chairperson, the Gusti Kanjeng Ratu Mangkubumi, our crown princess. Then in our Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we have 3 major program priorities. The first is to strengthen micro, small, medium enterprises as the pillar of the economic of Yogyakarta Special Region. And then the second problem is, the second program, we have what we call as digital transformation programs. And the third program is human capital strengthening capacity programs. Those 3 major programs is the contribution of Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry with all the enterprises member of the Kadin. And one of the report that I should mention here, we have around 1,200 MSMEs become the member of Kadin. Then I hope that the challenge after your report has been published by November, I'm also the secretary of Yogyakarta Special Region Education Council. One of the interesting survey from OECD is the what we call as PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. Unfortunately, our PISA, especially the PISA score of Indonesia, is one of the lowest score in ASEAN countries. We are only slightly better than Philippines and Cambodia. But the PISA score related to education of Indonesia by 2022, we are lost. I mean, Singapore is much better than Indonesia, and then Malaysia is better also. But Vietnam is also much better than Indonesia compared to Thailand and also Malaysia. Indonesia is only slightly better than Philippines and Cambodia. So my suggestion is that OECD should strengthen the education system in Indonesia in order for the future investment of future education and future works in Indonesia will be the breakthrough strategy for Indonesia to reach our ambition to be Indonesian as the golden Indonesian emas, golden Indonesia. Then last report, I should mention that now we face a very difficult situation related to combating the corruptions. As indicated by the presenter before from FEB, that the case is very worse situation, but we need to avoid skyrocketing prices in Indonesia following by the Trump effects and also the uncertainty, the global uncertainty in Indonesia, because we are really afraid of the skyrocketing that happened in Europe and in other countries of the OECD members. I think that's all my comments. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity, and thank you Mbak Dian for presenting and representing us at the Kadin.
Yeah, thank you, Pak. Traditional program, if you have like some insight.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the comments and thanks a lot for the questions. I'll start from the question about the nutritious meal program, what the OECD has to say on that. There are a number of countries in the OECD that have introduced school meals programs over the time, and the results have been overall positive, but with some caveats which are important to underscore. The first point is that usually means tested programs, and with the program with the means tested is that they create a stigma for participants that is a dangerous phenomenon. So the alternative to the means tested school means programs is to have universal ones. And in case of universal ones, there are other risks. So one, of course, is the risk of targeting, that was mentioned in the case of subsidies. That's somehow a similar case. And the other problem is that the cost of universal school means programs, of course, much higher than when it's tested, the means tested. And at the same time, the cost, the greater cost have to be compared to the possible and the prospective greater savings which come from a more an healthier alimentation. And there is evidence that suggests that in countries where there are, and in environments where there are universal school meals programs, in terms of intake of vegetables, in terms of intake of sugar, in terms of intake of saturated fats, there are better outcomes when the breakfast are consumed out of a pack provided by the schools rather than when it's provided by the parents, which tend to use packaged foods. All in all, to summarize, all in all, but as it is always the case, the devil is in the details. So the way that is provided is important. On the fascinating presentations and by our discussants, I have to say that my Bahasa is far too poor to understand anything. I understand that was the mentioning of the Paris Agreement. That's more or less all understood. And but on the other presentation, I think that all the points that were made are very important. Of course, the carry through of the devaluation, depreciation of the currency on inflation is a major issue. And the point made about the risk of putting too much faith in monetary policy, if I interpreted it rightly, when the inflation is due to geopolitical risk, which is itself the result of events taking place thousands of kilometers away from Indonesia, is a very important point. I mean, again, it's how to strike the balance between doing nothing because it's a completely exogenous cause, and doing too much, or maybe overshooting in terms of inflation, interest rate policy, and in fighting inflation when the effectiveness of inflation of interest rates is policy rate is relatively low. So very good points made, and I don't know whether Charles has anything to do to add.
You mean on monetary education? So yes, we know that nurturing SMEs is very important, and it's really a whole transformative process where you need to help SMEs. You need to help them become. Once they are formal, then it's easier for other companies to sign contracts with them, to enforce contracts, to have complex value chains, and so it's a complex process. But the more firms, small firms become formal and grow, the more other firms can grow, and so yeah, it's really a transformative process. On education, yes, we write in the report how important education is for productivity in Indonesia, but also in all OECD countries. So of course we cannot enforce education reform. And actually in the OECD there is an education department where they are better experts than we are into what seems to work and what doesn't seem to work in terms of education. But overall, we think that there is some scope to invest more in education. That probably to improve teacher training, probably to improve their pay as well. There has been an effort to have honorary teachers become full teachers in the past, but there's probably more to do. And if the government needs to finance new projects, there's probably not a lot of scope to shrink funding and make savings on education. If anything, there's probably a need to spend more on education. And also in the report we highlighted a need to probably have a stronger basic curriculum where every kid, wherever the school he goes to, has some basic learnings in language, in mathematics, etc. And so some focus on basic skills is important.
Okay, thank you so much. I think probably like one last question not being answered. I think Bu Sekar can answer this about the uncertainty and then skyrocketing prices that you present. Like, what's your opinion? What's going the directions?
Yeah. So I think it's very important for us to realize that we're a small open economy. So we're not insulated from global shocks, be it real shocks or nominal shocks. We talk about like US monetary policy normalizations, you talk about geopolitical risks, we talk about like global food prices, global fuel prices. We're not insulated from all of those. So what I feel is very important is for the government to understand that what happened in 2022, because that was just a study case, that we have a very high inflation in 2022. That could happen whenever in the future. Okay, so we could go through the same kind of thing again. The problem is, how do you prevent that to happen again? So when we talk about like the food prices, the fuel prices in 2022, we talk about like the prices of rice, that is still persistent. I mean, it's still expensive at the moment. It's not like it's basically a permanent shock. It's not temporary shock. It's that would affect the welfare of a lot of people. Okay. So when I think of something like this, I think a lot more effort should be put into strengthening the effort to control for inflation, for example. It's not that I mean, we can debate about, makan bergizi gratis. For me, I feel like making sure that food prices and general level of prices is affordable for everyone in Indonesia it should be the priority at the moment. Okay, I feel like makan bergizi gratis at some point in the future. Probably we need that. Probably we need a targeted schools or kids, for example. But universal one at this point in time, I don't think it. I mean, fiscal space wise, I don't think it's the time to do that. So a lot of uncertainties, a lot of shocks that coming from abroad, for example. That's basically just a kind of like a lesson for us to strengthening whatever effort that we have. Inflation, financial sector, for example, green transition. We do have carbon tax. It just haven't been implemented because it's politically hard to implement a carbon tax, right? So effort like this, effort like the OJK's effort to kind of like the greening the financial system. I think it's really great. I think Budian here was presenting that makes us feel hopeful about the future of Indonesia. Okay. So when you talk about green transition, you can't just hope that the government would actually implement carbon tax. You start with financial sector. You start with, telling all of the banks to focus on, giving green loan, for example, or buying green bond, for example. Okay, so those little effort, I feel like it's very important for us to be more resilient in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Sukar. Big applause for all the presenters and discussion. So, if I can sum up like in several words, like our discussion is pretty fruitful. So we also see that like some is still like behind in digitalizations, in educations, on PISA score. We also see that Ibu Sekar presenting the uncertainty that facing in the futures. So we still have a need improvement in that area. So in order to close it out, I would like to invite Ibu Eni and Parimawan as our department head and also deputy to give some souvenirs to the presenters, also the audience that asking questions. Please Pak Rimawan, Bu Eni, come to the stage. Bapak, ya, please come forward. Mbak, ya, Ibu kasih itunya. Terima kasih, thank you. Nanti kalau mau sign-nya minta langsung, Pak. Sign kopinya minta langsung. Okay, to close it out, I think we should take a pictures. We stand over here, and then there's a photographer from that side. Okay. Aku bisa juga di MC lama-lamanya. Jawab.
So we sit down? Yeah.
Masukkan. Dapat nggak, Pak? All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Charles and Andrea. Thank you all the audience for coming, and see you for next Sinarku. Bye-bye. Makasih.